theology isn't a set of principles that we have to learn or a set of doctrines that we have to accept. So we could say that even though we had big dreams, God had bigger dreams. Hi everyone, Angelo here, and it's the 21st Sunday in Ordinary Time. So for the last time, or at least for right now, we are in chapter 6 of John. We're going back to Mark just now. But we're wrapping up the Bread of Life discourse. So over the last 3 weeks or so, I believe, we have Jesus saying everything what he would have said, saying things like, I am the bread of life. Whoever eats my flesh and drinks my blood will have eternal life. And everything we would have seen over the last few weeks. And then we have the followers here saying things like, after arguing among themselves over the last few weeks too, they're saying things like, this is intolerable language. How could anyone accept it? And Christ is like, oh, this bothering you? You ain't see bother yet. You ain't see nothing to bother you yet. So then, almost 100%, virtually 100% of his followers walked away at this point. So then at the end, John has Jesus is addressing the 12, or maybe could it be even a little bit more than that. And he said, what about you? Do you want to go away too? And then they're like, Peter in particular, they're like, Lord, who shall we go to? You have the message of eternal life. And we believe and we know that you are the Holy One of God. So today we are wrapping up this Bread of Life discourse. And this reflection, at least for me, might also end up being my tribute to theology as a praxis. And it's going to be a long one, I imagine, but I will try my best to make it worth your time. Because the same way Christ would have been offering what he said here and over the last few weeks, this thing that he believed to be so true, so real, so meaningful, and what would have brought him so much joy, is the same way too as how I feel about theology. And I do feel like I feel the same energy. I feel what Christ is feeling here in my soul. And if I'm able to share through my own articulations just a little bit of that joy and maybe even help someone move a little bit closer to God in their own relationship, then I'm all about that. So as we would see in the story, the dialogue at the end is mainly question-based, right? Because we have Jesus starting off with a question and then Peter responding with a question. So I want to focus on the importance of asking questions within theology. The thing is, theology isn't a set of principles that we have to learn or a set of doctrines that we have to accept. Or in our case, most of us as Catholics, it's not about knowing the catechism. Theology is faith seeking understanding. So understanding things about our faith, but we can't understand things unless we seek to understand them. And I would like to say something, or at least attempt to say something clearly here, that our faith isn't the same as our faith tradition. Meaning that our faith isn't our systematized religion. And we all use the words synonymously. I do too. And I suppose it is one of the limitations of language. But in more specific terms, I think a good description of our faith has its starting point in some formulation of the creed. Belief in a Trinitarian God who loves us, who entered into history and still enters into our own stories, who lived among us, who still lives among us, who taught us and who still teaches us, who was killed by the Roman Empire, and yet somehow is alive and still very much loving us today, and the implications of that, whatever that might mean, which is why we have to seek to understand. And as many of us already know, to understand something requires a few factors, things like time, observance, asking questions, of course, and reflection. So when it comes to something like theology, it would take our whole lives, and then even still, all we really have is the puzzle piece that God would have given us. I was listening to this audiobook, and one of the lines went something like, "We ask questions to solve the mysteries of the universe." The thing with theology, though, mysteries are things to be solved. Mysteries are things that we lean into. And we always say that God is a mystery, especially to children. When we don't know what to say, we'll say, well, God is a mystery. But it's true, the same way, all of us, we are all mysteries, meaning that we could never truly fathom the depth of another person, no matter how good we might know them. We could still never know their thoughts, their feelings, everything they go through at any given point in time. So even more so for God. The thing is, mysteries contain an unfathomable depth. But we can't attempt, keyword being attempt, to get to the bottom of this unfathomable depth without first diving in. And asking questions helps with the dive. So I imagine here Christ must have felt super conflicted in this moment. I mean, distraught even. He must have had a lot of questions about himself. Because here's this young man with these radical ideas. And he's asking questions of God, asking questions of himself, and asking questions of his centuries-old faith tradition. Or maybe it might have been a little bit older than that at this point. But one of the beautiful things about faith and spirituality is that there's always a plurality of ideas. Because if we always believe things in the same way, or if we always understood things in the same way, then there would be no dynamism or creativity or diversity, even in religion, which is what I don't think religion ought to be about. I don't think religion ought to be one-dimensional. At the same time, our mainstream does inevitably take hold. And it makes sense. I mean, I think it's a necessary component. But what's mainstream doesn't necessarily mean it's most meaningful for everyone. And I think that is what Christ is offering us here through this theology, through this doctrine that he's bringing up. A meaningful relationship with God, difficult as it might be. But what he's saying here goes against all that would have been mainstream. And this is what theology often does. It asks questions, yes, of our faith and our systematized beliefs, but also our faith experience, our experience of our faith in the here and the now. It seeks to understand our faith however we can in our own historical context. And at least I think it's okay to ask as many questions as we need, because it enriches the conversation, and we are still growing. The same way the universe is still evolving, the same way our bodies are constantly changing, no matter how old we are. It's okay to understand things in one way now, and then later on, maybe even have a totally different understanding of it. But this is what it's about. It's about growth. I mean, we're all constantly evolving. God is constantly giving life into this evolving universe. The thing with theology is real work, and is meaningful work, and it requires real bravery, and it requires real grace. Because I mean, besides my own personal experiences, I have heard too many stories about my friends in the CTCT and the Conference on Theology in the Caribbean today, and the backlash that they would have suffered for seeking to do real, meaningful, authentic theology and asking real, meaningful, authentic questions. Theology might seem like something for people who aren't busy with real issues, but the reality is this is one of the realest issues that we can deal with. And the reason I say that is because this is about working on our relationship with God within our own historical context. So it's not because we're trying to win God's favor or anything. But because God is our lover and we are God's beloved, this is how we reciprocate the divine hug. This is how we hug God back. And that work, this work that we do, inevitably ought to translate into action. So I've referenced this before, and I'll bring it up here again. But Bishop Clyde Harvey, who is also a member of the CTCT, he once addressed us in a meeting and he asked, how does your praxis become the means for your conversion? And I think that's such a fundamental question for anybody who is interested in theology. And it's like Helder Camera asking his questions. Camera was doing theology. He was asking theological questions. And he has a famous quote, which I'm sure many of you know, where he says, when I feed the poor, they call me a saint. But when I ask why the poor are poor, they call me a communist. People might have branded his questions as Marxist rather than Christian, the same way people might brand a lot of theologians and their questions as anything other than Christian. But the reality is, Camera and so many theologians, we're asking real Christian theological questions. It's the same way too that so many of us would question our faith experience in the here and now. And even if we ask them silently in our heart for fear of backlash or negativity or ostracization, I think that's a word. I'll check after. But yeah, for fear of that backlash and that negativity. But meaningful theology, at least I think, cannot be divorced from our everyday experience. Because then that invites a dissonance into our lives that leaves us spinning top in mud. It's like we have faith over here and then we have real life over here. And the two never merge, the two never integrate. It's like how Christ would have been raising these new issues that he raised in here over the last few weeks. He would have undoubtedly gone through his own questions, or at least I imagine so. Because I highly doubt he was just born with this wisdom and this knowledge that he's presenting with us here today. He brings forward an idea that makes people have no choice but to question it. And everything that we would have spoken about in the last few weeks, from knowing our stories to our identity as beloved and the tangibility of that, is all encompassed in this relationship that we have with God, this mystery that we lean into. And our relationship with God, like any healthy relationship, is about trying to get to know and love the other. And we get to know the other in one of the many ways, besides things like time and observance and reflection. We get to know the other through asking questions. I would say, in this case, the other person, but really and truly it's three persons, or at least the way Christians, the way we understand God, a monotheistic God. So one substance, one essence, in three persons, whatever that means. But I'll be bold here and say that we might be able to swap the word person for experience, but all this Trinitarian talk is for a totally different conversation altogether. It's rather energizing, but for sure that one is a long one. And then still, we might never, or we won't ever, fathom the depth of it. But going back to this main idea of faith-seeking understanding and of asking questions in order to seek to understand our faith, let's not discourage those who ask questions, young people especially. Let's not discourage those who are brave enough to ask questions, even if we think that they might be wrong from the outset. Because these people, they would have wrestled and then, ultimately decided that Christ was wrong. Some of them probably decided from the beginning that he don't know what he's talking about. Yet, now, 2,000 years later, we uphold this very doctrine with a passion that I wish I could see take place throughout the entire church. Meaning the passion, not necessarily the doctrine. I mean, the doctrine is fine, but I don't think that if we didn't understand this in the way we do, that it disregards Christianity altogether. But I mean more so the passion that we now uphold this, that everybody, at least according to the story, almost 100% of people would have said, this isn't it, this isn't the truth. We now have such a passion to claim that this is truth. So this passion, I would love to see it take place in the entire church, especially when it comes to things like social justice. But for those who are asking questions, let's have a conversation, let's dialogue, let's hear what the Holy Spirit is saying through us. And I mean, that's what the current synod is supposed to be about becoming a more synodal church, a more deeply listening and reflective church. You know, our church has had a way for so long of strong-arming people or arguing or reasoning people into belief. And those things have their time and their place. I mean, apologetics is good and necessary, and it has its time and its place. I just don't think it's the primary or the sole aspect that we should be focusing on. But I get it. I mean, in a world that has evolved to be so rational, and all of us, we center everything up here, we try to rationalize people into our faith. And I mean, that's the rational thing to do, to try to rationalize people into faith. But anyone who deeply understands their faith knows that that's only one of the few and far steps on the journey, and probably more so earlier on in the journey. Because faith goes way beyond something that we can rationalize or rationally understand. So for example, most, if not all of us, could look back on our lives, we could reflect on our own lives and see how God would have been orchestrating things for us from the start, especially when it comes to some of the more dark moments in our lives. There's no way for us to understand it in the moment, but then we could look back later on and say, I see God's hand in this. And I'll use a story from my own life to try to flesh this idea out. So when I was 18, I was preparing to go to university and all that. And I ended up going to Barry University because I wanted to study graphic design. But I had absolutely no idea that at Barry, that's where I would have encountered theology and then studied that alongside design. And then went on to further that even more. I mean, thank God for my professors and the entire theology department there. And then now doing this, sharing my joy of the gospel, sharing my experience, my love, hoping to be able to transmute that love to whoever would love to receive it. Because I feel blessed to be able to do this. But there's no way that 18-year-old me at the time could have ever looked forward and see this now, envision this now. And there's a lot of struggle and heartbreak in between all of that to get how we got here today. But I could look back and say God was in control the entire time, and God orchestrated everything and would have been with me through everything to get where we are today. And I imagine it's the same for most, if not all of us. Because, I mean, maybe there are people, but I don't know anybody who would be so good in their lives that they planned out everything at some point and were able to get their lives to follow exactly according to that plan. For most of us, again, if not all of us, things would have gone so differently from how we could have ever imagined. But we could look back and we could see God's presence in all of it. So we could say that even though we had big dreams, God had bigger dreams. And this is why, it's things like this, why we can't reason people into becoming Christian, or why we can't reason people into staying Catholic. We have to focus on how God is asking us to love one another and to love creation in a way that only each of us can do as unique individuals. And the only way we might be able to get answers to this is by asking questions. And all of this happens in our prayer lives and our faith lives. this theology, faith seeking understanding. This is the Spirit. This is what invites the Spirit that gives life. And this Spirit inevitably moves us to action. This Spirit, through our own questions, manifests God's love. And I think this is, one of the things that the Eucharist is about entering into the loving relationship that God is inviting us into. And take my word for it, it is a lot more meaningful when we do question it. But trying to understand our faith, it very much is a promising journey. It very much is a difficult journey. But it's worth it. It's super worth it. Trust and believe. It informs the meaningful experiences that we have in our lives, those moments of our lives that we will never forget. The times where we are rendered so helpless in our humanity that all we can do is be grateful to God and say thank you. And don't get me wrong, it's not a perfect world. Some real messed up things happen sometimes, a lot of times. But we can make it through anything with this Spirit that God is inviting us to participate in. This Spirit of God that is with us, we can make it through absolutely anything. And theology is a solid pathway to living a life like that. And I mean, personally, I always thank God for bringing this gift into my life. I believe we all have opportunities to encounter the divine at some point in our lives, at multiple points in our lives, whether it is within Christianity or not. I mean, it could be within Christianity, it could be otherwise. But the extraordinary is very much in the ordinary, and the divine is very much in its creation. And theology has contradicting ideas in it, for sure. But that's okay, because life is full of paradox, and that is where the creative tension lies. That is where the beautiful moments are. So, to everyone interested in theology, I will tell you, like I told my first seminary class, be bold, be brave, be experimental when it comes to doing theology. Similarly, coincidentally, Angelina Jolie has a very similar quote, for whatever that fun fact is worth. But follow whatever questions God has put into your heart, because this journey will light up your whole life. And at some point, just like the demons and just like the disciples, we will recognize the Holy One of God. Anyways, that's it from me this week. And as always, I appreciate you so much for watching. Thank you.